the 80-20 of eating. Food is medicine, but still food is a source of pleasure as well.
It is.
So talk to us about 80-20 and how you instigate that.
As I sort of brought forward my work in nutritional psychiatry, I developed what I call pillars of nutritional psychiatry. And one of the pillars was really emanated from questions that I get. And I'll explain that in a second. So 80-20 is that 80% of the time we're trying our best, we're eating healthy meals, but 20% of the time life happens. If you have kids, you might come across a cupcake, as I say to people. If you take your kids to a birthday party, if they're back in, going to birthday parties these days, it's that kind of thing. You can't punish yourself. You can't feel badly about it, because we also know from research that when you feel emotionally distraught about something, it doesn't help your stress. It doesn't help other things. It's not necessarily about the food on your plate today or the number on your scale tomorrow. It's really about what you're going to do to change your relationship with food over time.
Doctor's Kitchen. Recipes, health, lifestyle.
Uma, thank you so much. Well, we get to meet in person.
Finally.
Yeah, but there's no kitchen here, unfortunately. I would have loved to have cooked with you.
We have to do that another time.
We'll do it another time.
Yes, next time cooking.
Yeah. So you're in the UK.
I am.
How long are you going to be here for?
I'm just here for a week for this amazing conference where you are running a keynote and presenting, and so am I. And it's really a wonderful experience because I hear the largest integrated and personalized medicine conference in the UK. So it's quite something. It's impressive to see people bringing this forward.
It's amazing here.
I felt I had to support.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's great. I've been in this room pretty much the whole time, but going around and chatting to people on the stands and just hearing about some of the speakers and what they've been up to, I could just definitely feel the energy here. And I feel, at least, in our little bubble here, that the sort of the movement and the message around integrative medicine is certainly moving forward. But you've been a pioneer for this for many years now. Your book is incredible. We've already done a podcast. Yeah. Let's dive into some other topics that you might have built on, maybe things that you've changed your mind on or perhaps haven't, or added. I want to start off with hydration. I saw a post that you put on recently on Twitter reminding people about hydration. Let's talk about hydration and the role of that with mental health and well-being.
Right. It's something that many people overlook, because although my field is nutritional psychiatry, well, hydration is part of that. And in mental health, I've seen people develop panic attacks or worsening anxiety when they're not hydrated. And it's something it's part of my checklist that I've developed when I see people clinically. And I started to look into the research because I knew I was seeing it clinically. So it was one of those things that sort of went in reverse. Then I found that people had written about it. There was research. And there's also an association between dehydration and levels of depression. So I think just being hydrated and making sure that you're drinking water is just good for your mental health and your metabolism. So I'm glad you asked about that, because it's overlooked. But it also taps into something, Rupi, that I think you and I believe, which is sort of an integrative but a holistic level of care, partly, cultural backgrounds and maybe growing up around spices and, Ayurveda and things like that, really bring it together. And so I think we shouldn't forget exercise, hydration, mindfulness, meditation, all of it. But food is a big part.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring up hydration, because I think you're right. It is kind of overlooked. A lot of people don't really think to ask about it, particularly when it comes to, people who might lack energy later on in the day, or they feel like they have some brain fog. Reminding yourselves to drink regularly, as we're doing right now, is a very important thing. Do you have any tips to sort of remind people about hydration status?
So we do a few things. One is that, now there are these very fancy, almost smart water bottles, which will tell you how much you're drinking. And for the person who struggles to be refilling that glass of water, it actually works. So I usually suggest that people find a sustainable either glass or stainless steel bottle, and they refill it at work. If you're in a hybrid model, make sure that you're checking yourself in terms of, if it's, say, 16 ounces, you want to fill that at least 4 times during the day, which is the average size of our water bottles in the US. I'm not sure what the translation would be here. But try to do that. If you are at work back full time, keep some sort of a reminder on your desk. Maybe it's an alarm. Maybe you know that by lunchtime you ought to have checked off a few glasses. Some people still document it in their phone, or they have a little written list that they keep. Then I like people to feel that they can make water interesting, because as a chef, I love food and everything we drink and eat to be delicious. So add in the berries, and then eat the berries at the end of the day. Add in the slices of citrus fruit. I've even seen water bottles where you put the piece of citrus at the bottom, a fresh piece. And, with lemon, even the lemon rind is good for you. So this is a way to keep yourself hydrated. I try to, stay with water. Another good one that I love is mint, because fresh mint actually contains an antioxidant, luteolin, and luteolin is associated with helping brain fog. So there's a nice one when you're feeling that, afternoon dip and you think I should have yet one more cup of coffee. You can, if you can tolerate. Caffeine is fine. Coffee is fine in moderation. Caffeine is not always great for people. Coffee, because of the number of polyphenols, but have a mint tea, or add the mint to your water.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little bit of a pick-me-up.
Absolutely. Mint, that's a great one. What about some of these hydration sachets or hydration mixes that people use, particularly after sports and endurance exercise, that contain sugars, salts, maybe even fortified with things like magnesium? What are your thoughts on those?
So I think it's with any of those mixes or actual drinks that are sold in a bottle or something you add to water, you just have to watch for the sugar content, because our bodies need sugar. But I think how the quality of sugar we take in is important. So I have nothing against those mixes. In fact, we have some really great new ones coming out. But at the same time, you want to make sure they're not loaded with sugar. Because quite often we reach for a sports drink, and even though it has the electrolytes, it also has a ton of added sugar, and that can offset the positive benefits. So just look at the balance. Try to find a version of the newer pods or the drink that has less sugar. But here's the thing, Rupi, you also can't go in the direction of artificial sweeteners, because those are disruptive to the gut. So it's tough for people. That's why adding in fresh berries or something like a whole fruit, may be a little bit better. And then they have these other electrolyte replenishing powders, which don't necessarily have sugar.
Yes.
And those actually, I think, are great, because they give you a little bit of sodium, and they give you other things which replenish what you may have lost during sweating and during the exercise. So those are okay. But often people consume and are taking in more sugar than they realize.
Yeah. Certainly those sports drinks, I think, are loaded with fructose, and we both know about the impacts of sugar-sweetened beverages on things like uric acid levels.
Right,
that
like
we've been
Dr.
hearing
Pumper,
about.
yeah.
Exactly. But also the impact on liver function. I wonder if there are any sort of thoughts on adding more salts to the diet, as long as somebody isn't a salt-sensitive hypertensive. Do you have any thoughts on those?
You asked me earlier about things that I've been thinking about since my book, and certainly with salt, I've realized, I feel like it's important. Again, we come back to that thought about balance. I think consuming enough salt is important for how our biochemical reactions work in the body. If you are a salt-sensitive hypertensive, then you need to follow the directions of your doctor. But at the same time, you shouldn't necessarily exclude salt. In culinary school, it was one of the most important ingredients. Of course, I think chefs will oversalt things, but but it is important for the flavor of food. So that is something I feel people can really speak. It speaks to body intelligence and also consulting with their doctor. So you've got to find that balance. But one of the other things that I really have been rethinking, Rupi, since writing my first book was that, there's a lot more now about saturated fat, red meat, that, there's a very seminal paper in 2020 that came out through the Journal of the American Cardiology Association that spoke about really rethinking saturated fats. And I think that at the very least, we need to include that in the conversation. It doesn't mean we need to eat steak every day. It doesn't mean that we should cook in butter all the time, but I think there needs to be a balance. So I think that I now share in nutritional psychiatry has become so much more personalized now because of the gut microbiome being so unique. Now, I don't say to my patients, you have to eat just lean beef. You can have steak, but here's the thing, eat it with lots of vegetables. If you can, get a better quality of the meat and balance that up. So that's one real position. If I were to write something again, I think I would want to bring that in.
I hope you write some more stuff. Yeah, because I think it's a great resource. And we have it on our website. We recommend it as our sort of essential list of readings. I think it's brilliant. So salt and saturated fat, those are very interesting. I think also it plays into another concept that you're a big fan of. Obviously, being a chef, someone who enjoys food, the pleasure of food is so integral to our human experience. The 80-20 of eating. Food is medicine, but still, food is a source of pleasure as well.
It is.
So talk to us about 80-20 and how you instigate that.
As I sort of brought forward my work in nutritional psychiatry, I developed what I call pillars of nutritional psychiatry. And one of the pillars was really emanated from questions that I get. And I'll explain that in a second. So 80-20 is that 80% of the time we're trying our best, we're eating healthy meals, but 20% of the time life happens. If you have kids, you might come across a cupcake, as I say to people. If you take your kids to a birthday party, if they're back in going to birthday parties these days, it's that kind of thing. You can't punish yourself. You can't feel badly about it, because we also know from research that when you feel emotionally distraught about something, it doesn't help your stress. It doesn't help other things. So that's important. So I liked people to feel encouraged that they can eat more foods of different varieties and feel they have to eliminate foods or food groups unless they have an allergy or an intolerance. So 80-20 captures a lot of that. But the other thing that I try to share with my clients and in my work is it's not necessarily about the food on your plate today or the number on your scale tomorrow. It's really about what you're going to do to change your relationship with food over time. Because if you're struggling with, maybe over the pandemic, you eating that tub of processed ice cream every night, right? Or someone else is like, everyone in my family is eating chips or whatever it is. It's taking that one thing and just tweaking it, so that over time it becomes, in chapter 11 of my book, I have a recipe for ice cream made with bananas. You can make a chocolate flavor. You can add in crunchy chocolate chips. You can do lots of stuff with it. But can we rethink that conversation? And the question that always comes up with the 80-20 rule is, can I have cake on my birthday? And of course you can. You should have a piece of cake.
Absolutely.
If you like cake, you should definitely have it. Because it's that one day is not going to make a difference. It's what you're doing the rest of the time.
Yeah.
That will balance your blood sugar, help your metabolic health, help your uric acid, and all of those good things. And also enjoy your life. Because if not, you're going to feel restricted. And what happens is when people are restricted, there's a boomerang effect.
Yeah.
Because they don't eat any cake, they don't eat any of the ice cream, and then at the end of the month they buy 2 tubs. They end up eating too much, and then they feel bad. So
there's definitely a spiral to this, and it's very easy to fall into that comfort eating. I mean, certainly during the pandemic, I was drinking a lot more alcohol, unbeknownst actually.
Without realizing it.
Exactly, because it was a thing that you do to unwind, and it's just a way.
And you're at home.
100%. Absolutely. You need some source of enjoyment, but I found other ways now to outside of it. I barely drink these days. I wanted to talk a bit about nutritional psychiatry as a broader term. We spoke on the podcast probably over a year ago now, and even in that short amount of time, I feel that it's just become a lot more accepted for psychiatrists to sort of lean into this concept. What has your experience been thus far since your book came out and since you've been having more conversations with people in your profession?
So that's a great question, Rupi, and I thank you for asking it. I think that my book, fortunately, did have a good effect in terms of bringing that conversation forward. I can't say that, my colleagues are practicing that way. I really can't. I will say that my colleagues who are GPs, internal medicine doctors in the US, functional medicine, integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine doctors are much more interested than the average everyday psychiatrist. But here's where a lot of my renewed mission beyond the book is really around the educational piece, because I was thinking recently, as I was preparing my talk, a lot of people know what's unhealthy. Like they know that tub of ice cream or the bag of chips, it's not, what you should be eating. They have some sense of it, but implementing that is very hard. It's about habit. It's about how do we reverse those habits, change them, even from the pandemic. But it's not that they don't know, but that conversation around food should be starting much sooner, right? And as doctors, we don't study nutrition. If we're interested, we have to find a way to study it elsewhere because we don't learn it in medical school. So I've been rethinking where the larger mission of my work should be, and I really feel it belongs in education of other healthcare practitioners and clinicians in order to move nutritional psychiatry forward. And so I'm working on that in a very active way, and I feel as though it's something we'll achieve. It'll take some while to create the infrastructure, but because I want doctors, whether they, whatever specialty they are, or clinicians, whether they are nurses, pharmacists, dietitians, social workers, whoever it is, to be able to start having those conversations around, I understand you taking these medications. Have you thought about lifestyle, diet, mindfulness, hydration, all of those things? Are we having those conversations? And I feel that rather than expecting people to know what they should know about food when they come into the doctor's office, how about we change that around, and as clinicians we start to have those conversations. And so I feel like it's very hard to change behavior, but it starts with that conversation, because if you educate a parent, they're going to take that home and feed their kids differently.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that it has to start somewhere, so I'm going to try that. I feel it's important. And
yeah, we should definitely talk about that in terms of the experiences that I've had in trying to teach medical professionals here in the UK. We've done a multi-pronged approach where we've gone into medical schools, we've instigated some programs there. We've also done a postgraduate program as well where we do one-off workshops. And I think you'd be uniquely positioned to do this in America as well, where you have the chef skills, you have obviously the knowledge and the clinical experience to apply that to nutritional psychiatry. And I think people are calling out for courses. I get messages about a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Rupi. And some of this really came about for two reasons. Support from wonderful individuals like yourself and colleagues who wanted to bring this message forward, and asking the questions, well, how can we learn and do more? And honestly, mainstream mental health, I'll be the first to say, respectfully, will not do this for at least another decade. But there's a lot of hunger in clinicians of all kinds who want to do more, learn more. And there aren't, in the US, there aren't courses at academic centers. A lot of people, I released my own course. It was very successful, but in the private sector, it's very hard to get those courses accredited. You can, but it's a different process. So I decided, there are lots of people who attended. They were very happy. We had a robust time with it, and we might do it again. But I felt, the gap here is, if I'm a clinician, I think it works like this here. Every time you redo your license and renew it, we have to get our continuing education credits, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
So I decided, well, that was a way to think about it, because then clinicians are going to want to do it.
Absolutely. And
we can get it accredited. And that's, unfortunately, I have the support of my hospital behind me in doing this. So we'll see.
Definitely. I think just for the listener, the CPD points, or continuing professional development points, are critical to do every single year, and you get to collect those points from different things, different activities: attending a conference, going on a course, doing some self-reflective work, doing some MCQs, examinations, all the rest of it. So that would definitely fit the sort of criteria, and I think a lot of people would be interested in diversifying where they get those CPDs. Moving on to what listeners can do at home, right? I'm always asked about pulling together a cupboard of ingredients that people should have. Ingredients. So we're going to tap in to the chef side of your brain now.
Okay.
So what kind of why don't we separate them? Like store cupboard ingredients that are non-perishable. What kind of things should somebody have in their store cupboard when they're trying to think about preventative medicine, protecting their brain and mental well-being? And then we can move on to spices, which I know is both of our passions.
Yes. No. So I was going to say, with things that are non-perishable, one of the things that people overlook, right, are spices. But before I get to that, I'll tell you, Rupi, that one of the things I learned in culinary school was that you should use a pure form of salt.
Okay. Yeah.
And it turns out that a lot of, now I don't know your types of salt in the UK, but you might know that much better. But in the US, I use kosher salt. And it happens to be really a pure version of salt. And you've got to get used to the level of salt by cooking with it a little bit, because our salt that comes in the canisters actually has added kind of yucky ingredients in it. And it's probably not good for us. So it's also a little bit more salty. So thinking about it just from bare bones, thinking about the type of salt you have, thinking about the spice cabinet you build out, but then thinking about really budget-friendly ways. And I think you've written about this and you talk about it, which is so important, because people assume that, you can only eat for your brain health, your physical health if you're really wealthy. Yeah. But you can buy dried beans, dried legumes, dried lentils. You can get even canned organic chickpeas, for example, rinse them out and have a perfectly good meal by cooking them the right way. So I'd like people to lean into those things a little bit more. Nuts and seeds, which are great for your brain. They have the short chain omega-3s, tons of fiber, tons of other nutrients you need. Those are good things to tap into. But other brain foods that are inexpensive are canned mussels, canned oysters, sardines, salmon, and you can get pretty good quality ones. So don't feel you have to go and buy a whole salmon, which is probably, certainly in the US, it's very, very costly, to just feed your brain. There are other ways to do that. So for, the things that you buy on a shelf and buy and can store in your pantry, that's one way to go.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I did a series on Instagram where I was teaching people how to cook their lentils and legumes and everything from scratch, right? Because a lot of people don't know, like, oh, okay, I've got to soak it, and then I can boil it, and then I can add bicarbonate, I can make it softener. So, all these different sort of things that I was taught, growing up in an Indian household is just the norm.
That's right.
I remember
you watch your grandmother and your mom doing it.
I watched my mum. We used to get these lentils, and she would put it out on a big platter, and she would painstakingly pick out the stones.
They pick out the stones.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, luckily, I don't think we have to do that anymore because they're better.
The way that they are produced is a little bit better. But it's so interesting you say that, Rupi. I've been visiting with family, and I've introduced them to the Instant Pot.
Okay.
Now I have no association other than using one. But my grandmother, my mom, they'd go through the tray of lentils, pick out the stones, and they'd soak it. So it was a whole process by the time you got to the dal that you like.
Yeah.
But they would do it every single day because that way the family was well fed. But the Instant Pot, if it's certainly an expensive piece to buy, but I will just say you can go from dry lentils with water, always rinse them, with water, to a softened dal-like consistency or soup consistency in 3 to 5 minutes with the very fast pressure cooker. And that's a time-saving thing if, say, you have a large family and you're making a stew, say you're cooking meats, that could be done that way as well, or just lentils, which are super nutritious, right? And so,
And less gas, I guess, as well, if you're using...
Yeah. I think so. And, one of the... so there are there's the asafoetida powder, we use culturally. Then there are, I think, soaking and rinsing helps as well. So it's all important.
Yeah. Let's talk about some other store cupboard ingredients. So you're a big fan of whole grains, things like different types of rice, different types of bran. What kind of ingredients do you look for in that sort of category? And what are the nutrients that are specifically supporting our brains?
So in the conversation on mental health, I'm careful about whole grains because they're very important for our microbiome. But a lot of individuals with even if they don't have a full-blown mental health diagnosis, may struggle with weight issues. So you want to be careful that the glycemic load is something you're paying attention to. So I like grains like quinoa because they're high protein and high fiber. I like things like, depending on the oats, if you're going to have oats, have them steel cut, have them be portion controlled about them, because they can become calorie dense and affect over time some of your metabolic health. So you want to be a little bit careful about balancing it, but I'm not by any means saying don't eat whole grains. If anything, add them in. And so I think that, fiber is probably one of the most important things we get from them. Now, in the US, we know that, people are fascinated by the numbers of grams of proteins.
Yeah.
But we actually,
Same here as well.
one in 10 of us eat
yeah.
enough fiber. So this whole grains are a really easy way. And I like people to think a little bit out of the box and be curious about things like spelt and farro.
Yeah.
Add them into soups. You can always find a video online to learn how to cook something these days, but add those in, as well as the other grains, that everyone is used to.
Yeah. And is it specifically those whole grains with the husks that contain the complex B vitamins? Is that the complex?
So that's definitely part of it. And it's a good way to get some of the B vitamins in. But what I find is sometimes people don't always know quite what to do with them. So I try to stay with things that usually, like with quinoa, it's one part to maybe sometimes two, but depending on the type of quinoa, and you can kind of steam it and cook it, and then you can flavor it with other stuff. But it's I think when we can get them in a whole grain form, it's much better. Yeah.
Let's move on to spices. I think we're both like sort of wanting to go. So in terms of your spice cupboard mix, which ones would be your personal favorites, or ones that you feel that are easiest to utilize across different cuisines with some of those health benefits as well that we know from their phytonutrient profile?
So I think, this is a tough one for me, because culturally I grew up around Indian spices like yourself. And so I'm most used to those. Yeah. But I also love, French cuisine, and I love lots of different types of cuisine. And I think that if you for yourself, my spice cabinet is a little out of control, because I want to have everything that I can get my hands on. And then I learn about like an Ethiopian spice, and then I want to make it myself. So I want to make my own berbere. But I think if we're talking to your listeners, think about the flavors you like. Do you like Italian food? Then lean into the, oregano. If you like Indian cuisine, then you want a basic turmeric with a pinch of black pepper for your brain. You want, coriander, cumin, some form of chili, a chili powder that is flavorful if you like spice. And you want some of those basics. If you like Mexican cuisine, dried Mexican oregano, super rich in antioxidants, including luteolin, great for brain fog. So, think about flavors you like and build from there. Because a bottle of spice, if it's dried, you only need to use half the amount that you would compared to the fresh herb. And that's one thing. Secondly, it'll last you about a year. So find 5 to 10 that you really like and start to practice with those. Yeah. And where you can, things like ginger or garlic, use those fresh and add those in, and use dried for the ones you don't get easily. Yeah.
Are there specific call-out spices that you think are particularly useful for brain health? I know you mentioned dried oregano, or oregano, as we say over here, for the luteolin and some of the other phytochemicals you'd find. Are there any others in a similar vein?
So turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. So turmeric contains curcumin, which is the active ingredient, and it is brought alive or made more bioavailable to the brain and body with the addition of black pepper, which contains piperine. So piperine and black pepper interact with it. Very important to add it. And if you don't cook with it, add it to soup, a tea, a smoothie. Get used to it over time. The other one is, cayenne, which is basically what you find in chili pepper, has great brain benefits. It can lift your mood, can be clarifying in terms of thinking, but you have to be able to tolerate a little bit of spice. Saffron has a significant amount of evidence associated with improvement of depression. But you and I both know when we say make a biryani or a dish with saffron, you don't use much of it, and it's expensive. So one of the few times I say, if you're struggling with this condition and you want something more on the natural spectrum, speak to your doctor about a good quality, clean saffron supplement, because there's good evidence associated with depression. So those are a few to get you started. And then there are things like rosemary, which are associated, around some things with cognition. So, adding them in can be pretty beneficial for you.
Yeah.
But start with ones that you like,
Yeah.
and build from there.
Exactly, build those. Yeah. I think those are, I've got some tips now in my head. I've got oregano, I've got mint, I've got the saffron and the rosemary as well. I've heard some things about parsley and sage. Would that be in the same spectrum of cognitive enhancing herbs?
They parsley and sage are definitely good. I know they have luteolin. I know that rosemary stands out for cognitive stuff, and turmeric stands out for cognitive stuff. But these are good, fresh, healthy ingredients. So the fact that they are plants and herbs and they are dried spice, they contain rich antioxidants. Yeah. So my feeling about them is, like, for example, Rupi, we're not at the stage of knowing everything about food dosing in mental health. But I say to people, if I'd much rather than eat at a fast food restaurant, you can start to include foods that are whole foods and healthier, because they're going to benefit you. So they might benefit your microbiome. They might have antioxidants that are going to benefit you. They might have these plant polyphenols. So even though we may not know that you have to have a teaspoon of it or two, we're eating, why not add them in? Yeah. And see what we learn from them as we go through. And I think the research will follow as we get more done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly getting the impression from a lot of people that getting a diverse spice mix can add to the plant diversity of your weekly meals, as well as, but I always think about it in the context of your foundational layer is certainly the whole foods that you consume, and then everything else is sort of like an add-on. Talking of add-ons, we talk a bit about supplements as well on this. Vitamin D, omega-3, iron for certain people as well. Are there food-based supplements that you're excited about? I know I get asked a lot about ashwagandha, berberine.
Yes.
It seems like there's so many. There's a whole bunch.
So I get asked about ashwagandha. Seems to be having its funny because it's been around a long time. It's part of Ayurveda, and I knew it as a kid. Yeah. But there is a good amount of evidence for ashwagandha and anxiety, but it's bitter. Yeah. So most people, most companies, I should say, put it into a supplement for that reason. So I think it's definitely one of the things that people should pay attention to. But because in the United States, supplements are not regulated by the FDA, I always just say to people, have that conversation with your doctor so that she knows what you're taking, and that, it's safe for you to take it. I think I've said this to you before, people know that grapefruit is healthy, but a grapefruit is a fruit that interacts with liver enzymes, and it's important in certain individuals on certain medications, especially in mental health. So just, I'm not just saying, speak to your doctor. There are reasons that, one might need to be careful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Uma, you're always ahead of the trends. You're ahead of the curve when it comes to nutrition within your clinical field. What kind of things are you seeing on the horizon that might not have as much evidence base today, but you're kind of bullish on in terms of they might come into sort of your practice, if it's not already, in the next 5-10 years, perhaps?
So I'm very excited about Psycho-Biotics.
Okay, yeah.
There's certainly research going on right now on some that's already started. And
what's the Psycho-Biotics? Sorry for the listener.
Of course. So this is really the use of almost using the gut microbes for positive mental health. And it's using food. It's using food to interact with those microbes and see if we can find alternatives to things like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors over time. So in other words, it's not that people won't need psychiatric medications, but are there more solutions? And there are companies and researchers that are doing more of this work, and I'm most excited about that because I think it'll, like with spices, provide one more solution for people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. A lot of the research coming out of APC, University of Cork, and a few other gut centres. I believe the Quadrum in the UK, at least, anyway. They're looking at this potential for live microbes to be consumed and improving your gut microbiota, with the knock-on effect on probably general well-being as well as mental well-being as well. But yeah, it's a very exciting field.
It is, general well-being so important related to the gut. But if we could tweak it a little bit more to add in that mental health piece where COVID has sort of uncovered that silent pandemic, which is mental health. And, in the UK, I've been watching some of the news, and I see in a positive way, I know the situation is sad, but in a positive way, a lot of focus on child mental health and teen mental health. And I think it's really key in the messaging for us to find more solutions across the board. Certainly in the US, prescriptions for children are higher than I would like to see. And I think if we found more solutions through food, Psycho-Biotics, symbiotics, and all of these ways that we can change the conversation about how we're all eating a little bit, not drastically, but just a little bit, I think it could make a difference.
Brilliant. Uma, you're always a pleasure to talk to, and I'm sure you're going to be very much part of our movement. So I really appreciate your work, and I hope to promote your courses and all the other stuff that you're going to do for clinicians in the future.
I would love that, Rupi. I'd love you to participate and always enjoy talking to you. It's always wonderful, and you're such a leader here in the UK, and I can see that. You're like the most popular guy at the conference. I mean, I flew across the pond, and all the women want to shake your hand.
Well, I'm sure you're going to be very popular after all your talks as well. But thank you very much.
You.
I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
If you enjoyed that video, you'll love the library of content that we have on doctorskitchen.com. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we have podcasts in our library on brain health, well-being, supplements, and lots more. Have a wonderful day.